Montana Territory, June 1872. The morning sky was a pale blue stretch over the endless plains, and the wind carried the weight of a decision that could not be taken back. Ruthie Callahan stood at the edge of her father's porch, her hands knotted together in front of her faded blue skirt. Her boots were worn, her bonnet too plain, and her eyes, though kind, rarely met anyone else's. She was 22 and had long stopped hoping for more than what life would hand her. Her father, Patrick Callahan, a rancher hardened by droughts and debts, cleared his throat behind her. "He's here," he said flatly. Ruthie turned her head, heart quickening. A single rider approached from the eastern trail, dust trailing behind a tall bay horse. She squinted. The man sat tall and easy in the saddle, his hat pulled low, a rifle strapped across his back. He didn't look older than 25, but there was something about the way he rode slow, steady that said he'd seen hard days. "That's the one?" she asked softly. Patrick nodded. "Name's Levi Nash. Good man. Keeps to himself. Has land out near the Bitterroots. Came looking for a wife." "I told him you'd do." Ruthie's voice caught. "You told him I'd do?" Patrick didn't meet her eyes. "You ain't getting younger, Ruthie. And we both know your looks won't turn many heads. This is a chance for you to have a home. A husband. Maybe even happiness." Her stomach twisted, but she nodded. What else was there? No one in town had ever looked her way. Not with her plain brown hair, her quiet ways, her soft voice. She had no beauty to speak of, only a steady hand with livestock and a tender way with injured animals. Levi dismounted, tying his horse to the post. He was tall, lean, with a shadow of stubble on his jaw and sun-darkened skin. When he stepped up onto the porch, he removed his hat. His eyes were a striking slate blue, and they landed on Ruthie first thing. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, and she braced herself for the flicker of disappointment. But it never came. "You must be Ruthie," he said, voice warm low. She nodded. "Yes. I am Levi Nash." "I know." He smiled, just a little. "Your father says you are strong. Good with animals. Quiet. Honest." She blinked. "I suppose I am." "Well," he said, glancing at her father, "those are the things I want in a wife." Patrick stepped forward, clapping Levi's shoulder. "Then she's yours, if she'll have you." It wasn't a wedding, not really. No white dress. No preacher. Just a handshake, a packed satchel, and the feel of Levi's hand gently resting on the small of her back as he helped her onto his horse. They rode west until the sun dropped below the hills, and the sky turned to copper and fire. Levi's homestead was tucked in a quiet valley, with a small log cabin, a fenced pasture, and a stream that sparkled in the morning light. The place wasn't grand, but it was clean, cared for. He helped her down from the horse, and she stood there, staring at the cabin. "This is it," he said. "Ours, if you want it." Ruthie turned to him. "You do not even know me." "I know enough. Enough to marry me." He nodded. "You are the most beautiful thing I have seen in a long time." Her breath hitched. "You do not have to say that. I am not saying it to be kind. I mean it." She stared at him, unsure what to do with that kind of honesty. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not once. Inside, the cabin was simple. A stone hearth, a narrow bed, a wooden table with 2 chairs. Levi carried her satchel in and set it down gently by the bed. "You can have the bed," he said. "I will take the cot." She turned. "We are married." He met her eyes. "I will wait until you want me near." That night, Ruthie lay beneath a quilt stitched in deep greens and browns, listening to the wind outside and the soft creak of the cot as Levi turned over. She had been given away like a mule past its prime, but he had looked at her like she mattered. The next morning, she rose early. She found him already outside, feeding the horses, his sleeves rolled up, the muscles in his arms taut as he lifted hay bales. She stepped out quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He looked up, smiled. "Thank you." They drank together in silence, the sun climbing higher. Over the next few days, Ruthie fell into rhythm, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, tending the small garden he had started. Levi worked long hours repairing the barn roof, splitting wood, checking the fence line. Evenings they sat together, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch, oiling his rifle. She sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. "I know I am not what most men want," she said quietly. "Not pretty, not lively, not." He set the rifle down and turned to her. You are exactly what I want. She blinked fast. Why? Because you see things clear. You are honest, gentle, and strong in a way most folks never learn to be. That's real beauty to me. Her eyes filled, but she smiled. You mean that? I do. That night, she did not send him to the cot. They lay side by side, her head resting against his shoulder, his hand in her hair. She felt safe, wanted, something she had never known before. I never thought I'd have this, she whispered. You have me now, he said, and I am not going anywhere. Ruthie reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. I think I could fall in love with you, Levi Nash. He kissed her forehead. Then I reckon I will do my best to make sure you do. The first rain came 3 weeks into Ruthie's new life, slow and steady through the late afternoon, softening the dry earth and drumming gentle against the cabin's roof. She stood barefoot on the wooden floor, sleeves rolled to her elbows, brushing damp strands of hair from her face as she watched the sky deepen through the open window. Levi had gone to check the trapline at dawn, and she hadn't heard his return. She set the kettle on the iron stove, then moved to the door and opened it, letting the smell of wet pine and turned soil drift in. In the distance, just past the bend in the trail, a figure on horseback appeared. Levi, soaked to the skin, a brace of rabbits tied behind his saddle. He dismounted with quiet ease. His coat clung to his shoulders, water darkening the brim of his hat. She stepped off the porch before he reached it, holding out a blanket. You could have waited out the weather, she said. His gaze met hers, damp lashes heavy over those pale eyes. Didn't want the traps left too long. Found 2 with broken teeth. Would have gone hungry. She wrapped the blanket around his shoulders, hands brushing his chest as she pulled it snug. You've got nothing to prove here. I know that, he said simply. Inside, he peeled off his wet shirt near the hearth as she ladled stew into bowls. The fire cast a low orange glow along the cabin walls, and shadows moved easy over his back as he hung the shirt to dry. She set the bowls down, catching herself watching him too long, then looked away. He sank into the chair across from her, lifting his spoon with tired hands. You ever think about having chickens again? Her brow lifted. Why? You know what you're doing with them. And eggs be good come colder months. I'd like that, she said after a moment. But I want to build the coop myself. I don't want to be the kind of wife who waits to be handed things. You're not, he said. Then, after a pause, you don't need to prove anything either. The rain eased into mist by nightfall. She stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, watching the last of it bead on the pasture grass. Levi came to stand behind her, close but not pressing. His hand brushed hers. I was thinking, he said, about putting in a second window on the north wall. Let in more light. She turned her head toward him. You do that? Well, you spend time sewing and reading there. Seems right. Her throat tightened. No one ever noticed that before. His brow furrowed slightly. I notice everything about you, Ruthie. The quiet between them stretched, warm and steady. That night, she stitched a patch onto one of his shirts by lamplight while he carved a spoon from a length of cedar. The tick of the clock on the shelf marked time soft as breath. Neither of them filled the silence with things that didn't need saying. Later, as she folded the mended shirt and set it by his side of the bed, he looked up. You miss your old home? She sat on the edge of the mattress. No, I don't miss being invisible. His hand found her knee. You're anything but. They didn't lie close that night, but their hands touched across the space between, fingers resting together on the quilt. Somewhere outside, an owl called low and long, and the wind shifted against the eaves. She didn't need to be told she was safe. She knew it in the way Levi never rushed her, never asked more than she offered. In the way he noticed, not to charm, but to care. In the morning, she woke before him. His chest rose and fell with slow, even breaths. She watched him a moment, then went quietly outside. The world was still damp, but the clouds had cleared, and sunlight spilled gold across the pasture. She walked to the empty pen near the barn. It once held goats, she guessed, based on the chewed corner post and the half-collapsed lean-to. She knelt, pressed her palm to the soil. It would hold chickens soon. Behind her, the door creaked. She didn't turn. You're up early, he said. So are you. He stepped beside her, crouched. Ground's good here. You'll have that coop ready before summer's out. She looked up at him. I want this place to be mine, too. Not just yours I've been brought to. It already is, he said. Everything I have is yours now. A breeze moved between them, soft as a held breath. She reached out and tucked a grass blade behind his ear, and he caught her wrist gently in his hand. You don't have to earn a place here, Ruthie, he said. You just have to stay. She didn't answer right away. Then she leaned forward, kissed the corner of his mouth light, unhurried. I'm not going anywhere, she said. By mid-July, the heat settled over the valley like a thick wool blanket draped too long across the shoulders. The grass faded to gold, and the creek ran slower, whispering instead of rushing. Ruthie rose early, before the sun cleared the ridge, to work on the chicken coop. Her hands had blistered, then calloused, but the frame stood tall now, and she'd begun nailing the slats for the nesting boxes. Levi watched her from the pasture fence as he checked a young heifer's gait. He didn't interrupt her rhythm. She liked that about him, how he gave her space, but not distance. That evening, she sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped loosely around her knees, watching the moths flit through the lavender dusk. Levi sat on the porch rail, carving a new latch for the barn door, his knife moving with patient care. You always work with wood? She asked. He glanced over. Started when I was a boy. My older brother used to make me sit still while he read scripture. I'd whittle twigs to keep my hands busy. You have a brother? Had, he said, setting the knife down. Died in Kansas. Fever took him fast. She nodded, letting the silence settle between them again. You, he asked. Any brothers or sisters? No. Mama had 2 stillborn. After that, she wouldn't risk another. I used to pretend I had an older sister. Gave her a name and everything. Nora. Levi didn't laugh. What was she like? Brave. She'd ride off on a horse with no saddle and come back with wildflowers in her hair. He looked at her, thoughtful. Sounds like you. She shook her head. No, I was always the watcher. Too careful. Careful keeps people alive. She looked at his hands, scarred, steady, shaped by labor. Did you ever think about leaving this place? She asked. Once, he said. When I first bought the land, I thought maybe I'd head down to Wyoming. Heard they were laying track near Cheyenne, hiring strong backs. But something about this valley held me. She turned toward the hills, where the shadows pooled in the folds of the land. Feels like the kind of place where time moves slow enough you can hear yourself think. He reached down, took her hand. It's the first place I've ever wanted to stay. They sat that way until the night swallowed the last of the color from the sky. The next morning, Ruthie walked to the trading post 5 miles east, her basket swinging at her hip. Levi stayed behind to finish mending the fence where a fallen pine had snapped 2 rails. She hadn't been to the post alone before, and as she stepped into the dim interior, the buzz of conversation dipped. A woman behind the counter, a sharp-jawed widow named Elsie, gave her a once-over. You're the one Nash married, she said. Ruthie kept her voice even. Yes. Figured he'd take one of the girls from town. Didn't expect he'd find a bride out in the Callahan Hills. Ruthie didn't flinch. I reckon he took what he wanted. Elsie tilted her head. You always this soft-spoken? No, Ruthie said. Just don't see the point in shouting when the truth speaks for itself. She paid for nails, a sack of barley, and a spool of heavy thread, then stepped back into the heat. As she adjusted the basket on her hip, a man in a dusty vest approached, gray around the temples, eyes narrowed from too much sun. You Nash's wife? I am. He nodded toward her boots. You're walking back? I've done it before. Tell him Harlan Graves says his fence line cuts 5 feet into my grazing patch. He'll know what that means. She met his eyes. If you've got a quarrel, come tell him yourself. Graves stared a beat longer, then spat into the dust and walked on. By the time she returned, her legs ached and her throat was dry. Levi stood at the edge of the pasture, shirt tied around his waist, sweat darkening his undershirt. When he saw her, he crossed the yard and took the basket from her arms without a word. Elsie asked about me, she said as they stepped inside. I imagine she did. Harlan Graves says you've stolen land from him. Levi poured her a cup of water. He's been saying that since I strung the first wire. He's got more land than he can manage, but some men don't like seeing others make good. Do you think he'll cause trouble? Wouldn't surprise me. That night, she laid her hand on his chest beneath the covers. If you have to stand your ground, I want to stand with you. He turned, pulling her close. You already do. She fell asleep with her ear against his heartbeat, steady as the land they'd both claimed. The barley Ruthie brought back from the trading post had been soaked, drained, and spread in neat rows beneath the cabin's overhang, where it would dry before being stored in sacks Levi stitched shut by hand. The days had settled into a quiet rhythm again, but the memory of Harlan Graves' message sat between them like a stone under the floorboards, unspoken, but solid. Late one afternoon, Ruthie was pulling weeds from the edge of the garden when Levi rode in from the ridge carrying a rolled map and a dirt-streaked ledger. He swung down from the saddle without speaking, his face shaded with a quiet resolve. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Went to the surveyor's cabin," he said, offering the map. "Wanted to know just how far the line runs. Graves is trying to claim a strip that don't belong to anyone." She unrolled it across the porch table, pressing the corners down with a stone and a folded rag. The ink was faded in places, but the boundaries were clear. "He'll press it anyway," she murmured. "Maybe." Levi folded his arms. "But I want you to know I'm not going to let him take what we've built here." "I never doubted that," she said. "But you can't do it alone." His gaze held hers. "I don't want to." That evening, they walked the fence line together, not to check for breaks, but to mark the earth with iron stakes Levi had forged himself. Ruthie carried the hammer, steadying each post while he drove it deep. The valley stretched quiet around them, the hills amber in the late light. At the southern edge, where the pasture met a stand of young cottonwoods, she paused. "There's something I ought to tell you," she said softly. He wiped sweat from his brow, waiting. "When I was 16, a boy from town asked to court me. He was kind, at first, but when my father wouldn't give him the land he wanted, he stopped calling me by my name. He said I'd always be a burden, too plain to be wanted without a dowry." Levi's jaw worked, but he said nothing. "I stopped speaking to folks after that. Figured it was easier to disappear than be seen that way again." He took a step toward her, his voice low. "I'm sorry for what he said. But he didn't see you. I didn't want to be seen after that. You let me see you," he said, "and I'm not ever going to look away." She didn't answer, but she reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing his cheekbone. He leaned into her palm a little, and they stood there until the last of the light softened into dusk. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side to finish the chicken coop. Ruthie painted the door with crushed berries mixed in boiled linseed oil, giving it the faintest hue of violet. Levi added a latch carved from pine, shaped like a feather. One morning, they woke to the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate. Levi pulled on his boots, stepped out with his rifle slung low across his back. Ruthie stood at the window, her heart steady but alert. It was Graves. He came alone, reins slack in one hand, the other resting on his saddle horn. His horse snorted, restless in the heat. Levi didn't call out. He waited. Graves stopped 10 paces from the porch. "You marking the line like you think it's yours?" "Because it is," Levi answered. Graves spat into the dust. "You make trouble for me. I'll answer it in kind. Then you'd better be ready to prove your claim in court." Graves narrowed his eyes. "You think folks'll back a man who married Callahan's daughter just to get a hand on cheap land?" Levi's voice didn't rise. "I married Ruthie because I wanted her. Nothing cheap about her." Graves stared a beat longer, then turned his horse and rode off without another word. Levi came inside, setting the rifle against the door. Ruthie stood barefoot on the plank floor, arms crossed. "You didn't have to say that," she said. "I know, but I'm glad you did." He stepped close, brushing a curl from her cheek. "There's not a man alive who could make me doubt what I've got." She leaned up and kissed him, slow and sure, the kind of kiss rooted deep not in longing, but in certainty. The kind that didn't ask for anything but gave everything back. That night, a hen laid the first egg in the new coop. Ruthie found it before dawn, warm beneath the straw. She held it in her palm, its shell smooth and pale against her skin, then walked back toward the cabin, where Levi stood at the open door, waiting. August brought a dry heat that hung in the still air, pressing down on the valley like a held breath. The creek had thinned to a shimmer, and the hills lay quiet under the sun's weight. Ruthie kept to the shade when she could, but most days demanded work that couldn't wait, watering the struggling squash, turning soil for autumn root vegetables, gathering kindling before the first frost came. One evening, as she hauled a pail of water from the spring Levi had dug past the ridge, her foot caught on a twisted root, and the pail tipped, soaking the hem of her dress. She let out a sharp breath, but didn't curse. Levi had always said she handled missteps like someone used to being overlooked, like she didn't want to draw attention to herself even when the world got unfair. He came up behind her, carrying a bundle of cut branches over one shoulder. "You all right?" he asked, gaze steady. "Just wet," she said. "I was thinking we should dig a second trough closer to the coop. The hens aren't getting enough in this heat." He set the branches down. "If we dig it, I want you to show me how to line it proper. You've got a better feel for when the soil hold." She lifted an eyebrow. "That a fancy way of saying I know more about mud than you?" "It's a way of saying I trust your hands more than mine when it comes to keeping things alive." She looked at him for a long moment. "How do you know what to say, Levi Nash?" He didn't smile, just touched the back of her hand lightly. "I listen." They finished the trough by candlelight 3 nights later, hands cracked and dirt caked, but proud. The hens took to it quick, pecking at the cool water as though they'd been waiting for it all along. When they stood back to look at the work, Levi reached for her hand without looking down. "You thinking about staying here for good?" he asked, voice low. She turned to him. "I thought I already had." "You have," he said. "But I want to ask you again, now that you've seen all of it. The dry patches. The hard days. Me, when I'm tired and short of word. I'm not here by accident," she said. "And I'm not leaving because it gets hard. We're building something, Levi. And I've never built anything that felt like mine before." He tipped his head. "Feels like home to me, every time I hear your boots on the porch." Later that week, a letter arrived by the hand of a passing trader. Ruthie opened it at the table while Levi shelled beans. The handwriting was her father's, stiff, upright, cleaner than she remembered. She read it once, then again, slower. "He says he's sold the ranch," she said, folding the letter. "He's going east. Says he's too tired to fight the land anymore." Levi looked up. "He say anything about you?" "He said I was right not to come back." She didn't cry, didn't frown, just folded the letter and set it aside. "I used to think I needed his approval to be worth anything," she said. "But I've got dirt under my nails and sweat on my brow and a man who sees me like I'm whole. That's better than any approval." Levi set the beans aside and came to her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "If you ever want to write him back, I'll ride it to town myself." "I don't need to," she said. "I've already said what mattered with my leaving." The first frost came in late September, crisping the edges of the squash leaves and turning the breath in their mouths to silver. Ruthie woke to find Levi already out, hammering shingles onto the barn's lean-to. She made coffee, wrapped herself in a shawl, and stepped out with 2 mugs. He took one, his hand warm despite the cold. "I want to fix the roof on the cabin next," he said. "Before the snow starts." "We've done a lot in one season," she said. "It's just the beginning." She looked around at the coop, the garden, the pasture fenced straight and true, the smoke curling from the chimney. "I never thought I'd get to start over and keep my name." He studied her face. "You ever wish you'd changed it?" She shook her head. "Ruthie Nash sounds like someone who belongs." That night, they lay in bed beneath a quilt she'd pieced together from leftover cloth, her head on his chest, his arm tucked beneath her. "You ever think we'll have a child?" she asked softly. "I think I'd be proud," he said. "But I'd be just as proud if it's just you and me." The oil lamp flickered low. She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. "I'd like to see a girl with your bones in my eyes. If she's got your will, she'll run this valley." They didn't speak after that, just listened to each other breathe, the quiet fullness of the room wrapping around them like a second quilt. By the time the snow fell, Ruthie had finished knitting 2 thick scarves, one in deep brown for Levi, one in green for herself. They hung by the door, waiting for the coldest mornings. The hens had slowed in their laying, retreating into the straw. Levi stocked the root cellar, and Ruthie dried herbs in neat bundles over the hearth. One afternoon, with sleet ticking at the windows, Levi pulled a small box from the top shelf and set it in her lap. She opened it to find a silver ring, simple but carefully made, the edges smoothed by hand. "Found it in town weeks back," he said. "Didn't want to give it until I was sure you liked the life we'd built." She took his hand and slid the ring onto her finger. "I like it," she said. "I love it. I love you." He didn't speak, just leaned in and kissed her slow, with care. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "We've got the whole winter," he whispered. "And every season after." The cabin held the warmth of the fire, but more than that, it held the quiet, steady pulse of two people who'd found something rare and lasting, not in grand gestures, but in small acts, strung together over days and sunrises and shared work. The valley outside lay still, blanketed in white, the fences strong, the land theirs. And inside, Levi and Ruthie Nash sat hand in hand, ready for whatever came next.